when people would say things like, Wilt was playing today, Shaq would ragdoll him and all this other nonsense. People just talking and don't know what they're talking about. Um, Wilt Chamberlain was clearly, from evidence, the strongest player in NBA history. And I would say the second strongest player was more likely Artist Gilmore. And then I would say Shaq. But Wilt was in a whole nother ballpark. I think this ain't the only metric to measure strength, but I think Shaq's peak bench press was about 440. About 440. Now, to put that in perspective, Ben Wallace, who was about maybe 3 inches shorter and maybe 100 pounds lighter, could bench press 460. Carmelo could bench press 360, 370. Charles Barkley, I don't know if he ever was really a weightlifter like that. I don't think he did a lot of that, but he was a country strong guy too. Um, I never really saw a defender bench press for Barkley, but he was very strong. Wilt Chamberlain could bench press in his prime. Well, before I say what he could bench press in his prime, when Wilt Chamberlain was 59 years old and was already dealing with heart issues, he could bench press 465. And that's documented. It's been said when he was younger in his prime, he could bench press about 570, 580, which is very, very impressive for someone who's 7'1" with longer arms. Um, Very impressive. And then another thing I noticed before I get into this, everybody that always tries to discredit or discount Wilt and say, oh, he was too skinny. They're always posting photos of Wilt when he was in high school or in college, when he was smaller. I noticed they never post photos of him in the 70s when he was much bigger, when he was walking around 315, 320 pounds, maybe even 330. They don't post photos of him then. It's an agenda. And a lot of this is, just misinformation or just flat out lying. But here's an article from 1965, written by Milton Gross of the New York Post. Milton Gross was a columnist for the New York, I think New York, no, I said New York Post. I meant New York, was it the Post? Yeah, New York Post, excuse me. He was a columnist for the New York Post from 1949 until his death in 1973. And it's an article written called The Strong Man. And it talks about, I'm picking up this article from a little bit further into it, but it's talking about at a time when Wilt Chamberlain was considering fighting the heavyweight champion of the world, Muhammad Ali. Now, the year before, Muhammad Ali, then named Cassius Clay, defeated Sonny Liston, who quit, I think, in the seventh round of that fight. And then earlier that year, beat Sonny Liston in a rematch. So there was talk about Wilt Chamberlain fighting Muhammad Ali, and the only reason Wilt had any interest is because he could have earned a cool $1 million, which is the equivalency of about $10 million today. That's the only reason why he had any interest. But most people told him, no, don't do it. At the time, Wilt was dealing with pancreatitis. And, if you get hit in the breadbasket on good time, it could rupture or injure, and it could be life-threatening. Mike Tyson just had an issue with ulcers. So anything in the breadbasket that's abnormal, it's very dangerous to go into a fight with. So anyway, start talking about Wilt Chamberlain's strength. It says, oddly enough, Chamberlain, Wilt, Gottlieb, Doug Gottlieb, Richmond, Ike Richmond, who was the president and I think owner of the Philadelphia 76ers at that time. As fate would have it, Richmond would die later that year, December, at a game in Boston at the age of, what was he, 50? I think it was in early 50s. Richmond had promised Wilt a piece of the team in the future, which is one of the reasons why Wilt, I think, signed on. uh, to stay with the Sixers. But after Richmond died in December, the guy that took over reneged on that promise, and that's why the rest of Wilt's tenure with the Sixers was very, very um, contemptuous and strained. He felt betrayed by that. But anyway, and then it talks about Cohen, who is Haskell Cohen, who was the NBA public relations chief. Oddly enough, Chamberlain, Gottlieb, Richmond, and Cohen were all together here tonight at Kutsher's Country Club for the annual coaches football and basketball clinic. It was at this magnificent resort hotel where Chamberlain, as a 16-year-old, worked as a bellhop and competed against the top college basketball players of that day. Red Auerbach of the Boston Celtics coached Chamberlain on the Kutsher team, and Wednesday his old friends spent an afternoon discussing why Chamberlain should not turn fighter, but why he could be highly successful if he did. Said Auerbach, he's the strongest man I've ever known. In one game a year ago or so, I thought he was going to hit me, and if he did, I knew he would kill me. The scene, as Auerbach recalled, it was a game between his own Celtics and the Warriors. At the time, Wilt was with the Warriors. Auerbach called a timeout and summoned the referee to argue a point. Chamberlain joined them to listen to Red's protest. It's my timeout, Red said to the ref. Get that guy out of our conversation. The ref ordered Chamberlain out of earshot. Wilt retreated a few steps and then rushed back at Auerbach. He's going to let me have it, Auerbach said to himself, and if he does, it's goodbye. Doug Gottlieb said, quote, there were only 2 times he ever hit anybody. That's what surprised me so much when he first told me he was thinking about fighting. This guy was too nice. He let the opposition belt him and push him around, and I was always telling him he had to hit back where they'd never get off his back, and he said he was afraid to hit anybody because he might kill them. Upon hearing of that, Red said, maybe. That's what Sam Jones had in mind, the player, when he grabbed the stool the day Wilt came after him. It was another Warriors Celtics game. Jones had been helping out double teaming Chamberlain. Wilt finally had too much of it. Jones grabbed the stool off the floor and waved it menacingly. That's the strongest man in the world, Sam explained later. I didn't have a gun. I had to even it up somehow if he kept coming. I don't mean the time with Jones, said Gottlieb. A few years ago, he belted Tommy Heinsohn and wound up with a swollen right hand, and that cost us a championship. The other time he threw what I think was the longest punch I ever saw at Clyde Lovelet. It hit him in the chin, and Lovelet went down and didn't have any intention of getting up. I don't blame Lovelet, said Cohen. I'll tell you how strong Wilt actually is. One day up here, I found a flat on my car and no jack to change the tire. Wilt was only 17 then, but he started to lift the back of the car off the ground with his bare hands when I stopped him. I was afraid the kid would give himself a hernia. Such stories of Chamberlain's astonishing strength are legendary at Kutsher's. Wilt was the only bellhop the hotel ever had who carried 6 full suitcases at once up 3 flights of stairs. One summer when work was over and he was returning to Philadelphia, Chamberlain met the bus with a duffel sack over his shoulder. He tossed it easily on the ground at the terminal, but when the driver tried to heft it into the baggage rack, he couldn't lift the bag off the ground. It was no wonder. Inside it were 4 16-pound shot puts and an entire set of weights that Chamberlain still lifts in a bodybuilding regimen he undergoes regularly. So that's that's probably 400 and something, 500 pounds. I remember one incident that tops them all, said Milton Kushner, the proprietor of the hotel. Wilt was in an auto accident some years back. The car rolled over and was completely demolished. Only one part of the car's roof wasn't crumpled, and that was right over the driver's seat where Chamberlain's head rested. To this day, I believe that the strength of his head and neck kept that area above him from being crushed and saved him from being killed. So, you see a lot of these types of stories when it comes to Wilt Chamberlain. And this is another one that a lot of people don't know about. When apparently Wilt Chamberlain unhitched a boat trailer by himself by hand. Former athlete Linda Huey, who was a close friend of Wilt, said, I bet she was a close friend. Quote, it was a long day of driving and boating and skiing. And when we got back to the house, Wilt totally took my breath away with an incredible feat of strength. Instead of going through the difficult maneuver of backing the boat trailer into the carport, Wilt simply unhitched the boat from his station wagon and single handedly pushed that heavy boat and trailer into place. Yeah. I mean, I know some of you guys have heard about the story in the 70s when Wilt was with friends mountain climbing, and Wilt had stopped to maybe take a leak, right? And then, they're mountain climbing and they noticed that Wilt had disappeared. And then, maybe some 10 minutes later, Wilt appeared with scratches all over. Scratches on his arm, shirt kind of, a little torn or whatever. And it was like, what happened to you, man? And Wilt said something to the effect of, man, I was taking a leak. I think he was taking a leak, man. I was, doing what I had to do, and a mountain lion attacked me. And basically, he said that he grabbed put his hands around the cat's throat, choked the shit out of it, and he said that he grabbed it by the tail, and he sort of did what Hulk did in that, like when in 2003 when Hulk had that tank and he sort of flung it. He just said he just flung the goddamn mountain lion maybe several feet away. I don't know. Uh, the only reason why people even entertain to believe it is because it's Wilt Chamberlain. Um, Now that one couldn't be confirmed, but he got those scratches from somewhere, so people tend to believe it. There's all these incidences. That Mel Daniels, who was very strong, and he was a player in the ABA. Mel Daniels talked about how he had gotten into a fight with a player on the San Diego Conquistadors. They were a team in the ABA. At that time, Wilt had just retired from the Lakers and was coaching them. And, Mel Daniels was ready to fight somebody. And Wilt had told him, like, to calm down. Mel Daniels was a hothead. He cursed at Wilt, and Wilt simply grabbed him and picked him up a little bit off the ground. And Mel Daniels, who was strong, he was a strong dude, but he couldn't get out of the grips of Wilt Chamberlain. And there's a lot of other stories, man. I mean, there's so many different incidences. Arnold Schwarzenegger talks about it. He's in now. Arnold's not just some guy. Arnold's one of the strongest people. Strongman, legendary strongman. He talks about how Wilt Chamberlain did things that he had never seen before. You can hear it in interviews. There was supposedly an incident where Wilt Chamberlain was sitting on, like one of those, what do you call it? Like a wall, but it's not that high up, but and he was sitting on a wall. Let's just call it a wall. And there was two women who were under him who had trouble climbing up that high, what I'm saying, to sit next to him. Now, when I say wall, I'm talking about like, it's not like a small, narrow edge. There was enough room to sit and whatever. So Wilt just simply picked those two women up and set them next to him with each hand. There's also video footage of Wilt Chamberlain at one of those comedy roasts picking up red buttons. Now, this may not sound very impressive. Red Buttons was about 5'7" and 160 pounds. That don't sound very impressive, but you have to figure Even when a strong person picks up another person that's smaller, that person usually has to brace themselves. There's a little bit of exertion. Wilt picked up red buttons like he was a baby. You know how like you pick up a baby and there's no exertion whatsoever? You just lift them up like with hands, not using your arm strength. That's how Wilt picked up red buttons, like it was like he was lifting up the baby. You got to see the videos to see what I'm talking about. But yeah, this is the man who was indisputably one of the strongest men in the world and the strongest NBA player, in my opinion, by far, Wilton Norman Chamberlain, most dominant ever.